Bonjour, bonjour mesdames et
Good
messieurs.
morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on the place you are to follow this conference. Today is Tuesday, 17th of October. It's 10 o'clock in the morning in Brussels, and it is a pleasure for me to welcome you for this annual conference of Educate. Before we start this conference today, and before we start our work, you know that yesterday there was a very tragic event in Brussels. There was a terrorist attack in Brussels. And so maybe we could start our work today by remaining silent for a few moments to pay tribute to the victims of this attack. So I'd like to invite you to remain silent for a few moments before we start the meeting as such.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Voilà. Merci.
So thank you to the participants and to each one of you for being flexible and for accepting to follow this conference online. As you can imagine, we had to reorganize this conference, and we try to do our best to make sure that everything is going to happen in the best possible way. So I'd like to welcome you to this annual International Conference of Educate.be. Educate is the Belgian platform for education and training in the framework of development cooperation. And this annual conference is a very important moment for the member organizations to share with the partner organizations and to define together the path to be followed in order to progress in the field of education and training. So my name is Romeo Matsas. I'm the Director for Policy and Social Change for the Plan International Belgium platform, and I'm so going to be the moderator today. And so we're going to discuss the topic of education and the access to decent work. So this conference is quite special because today is the opening session when we'll have two keynote speakers and a roundtable, but you will have the possibility to continue with online sessions during the month of November. There will be 4 Tuesdays that will make it possible for you to learn more about best practice and the programs of some member organizations that contribute to the work of Educate. And at the end of the morning, I'll give some more information about this. And before we start this meeting, I would like to give you some technical information. You should have received a program for today when you registered for this conference. We have interpretation in French and English today. And if you click on the small headset on the right-hand side of your screen, you will have access to the translation. Now, if you want to follow the original, you do nothing. And you will then have the possibility to listen in French or in English. But if you do want, you can use the translation. As a moderator, I will essentially speak in French, and I would also like to thank the interpreters and also ask you to remain silent in order not to create interference and disturb the work of the interpreters. So I'd like to invite you to remain mute when people intervene. Now, concerning the questions, you can raise the questions in the chat session. The moderation will look at those questions, and then I will ask those questions to the speakers. And I would kindly ask you to tell to whom you would like to ask your question so that I can know right away to whom I have to ask it. This conference is going to be recorded, and you'll be able to see it on the internet website www.educate.be, and the PowerPoint presentations can also be downloaded after the conference. Do not hesitate to share your ideas and to participate to debates on the social networks through the hashtag at ED for Decent Work. Normally, you should have received this information when you received the invitation. The conference is organized by educate.be with the technical and financial support of VVOB, APFA, the Belgian government, and ABEL, and UNICEF. And Educate would like to thank the member organizations, partners, and all the speakers, and to especially mention ABEL that offered the room, the conference center, to organize this meeting online. So before we start with the program foreseen for today, I'd like you to hear the message of the Minister for Development Cooperation. She cannot be with us today because she's on a mission in Morocco, but she wanted to share some ideas through a video message.
Chers experts en éducation, today,
dear education experts,
a subject close to my heart: the transformative character of education in development cooperation and its profound impact on the access to and creation of decent work opportunities worldwide. As we all know, education is not just about acquiring knowledge and skills. It is the key to empowerment, self-sufficiency, and sustainable development. Education is a catalyst for breaking the cycle of poverty. It is the cornerstone upon which we can build a society that fosters decent work opportunities for all. It equips individuals with the knowledge, skills, and values necessary to navigate the complexities of a modern labor market. When individuals have access to quality education, it equips them with the tools needed to secure decent work, to escape the clutches of low-paying and exploitative jobs, and to build a brighter future. In a rapidly changing world where the nature of work is evolving at an unprecedented pace, it is imperative that we recognize the pivotal role that education plays in shaping not only our workforce, but also our society as a whole. That is why our education system must be adaptable. We must equip learners with the ability to adapt to these changes, fostering a culture of lifelong learning. This means not just teaching them specific skills, but also cultivating critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. Additionally, we cannot discuss decent work without addressing the issue of labor rights and social protection. Education should instill in our citizens a deep understanding of workers' rights and social dialogue. By investing in education, we pave the way for an inclusive and equitable labor market. In conclusion, education is the cornerstone of development cooperation, and its transformative power cannot be overstated. It has a profound impact on the creation of decent work opportunities, breaking the cycle of poverty, fostering economic growth, promoting gender equality, and building peaceful and inclusive societies. That is why I'm committed to working tirelessly to ensure that our education system is inclusive, adaptable, and aligned with the needs of the labor market. Together, we can build a society where every individual has the opportunity to enjoy the dignity and fairness that decent work provides. Thank you all.
Voilà, nous pouvons remercier Madame la Ministre.
Well, we can thank the Minister for these very motivating words, and that is a very good introduction to this conference. And before we continue with the keynote speakers, I'd like to give the word to Mr. Benoit Stevenard, the new director of APFA, and then to Sven Roms, director of VVOB. As you know, Educate is a synergy between APFA and VVOB. Together, they work for the implementation of our program, and they work with the 53 other organizations that are members member of Educate. Now, APF is an international development organization that works with Wallonie Bruxelles International and the Walloon Agency for Exports. It is an institutional actor of the federal cooperation with programs in Morocco, Burkina Faso, Benin, DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, and Palestine. Benoît Stievnar is specialized in international relations. He has 30 years of experience in the field of international cooperation. He's been responsible of projects at the European Union. He is also responsible for international relations of the Anderlecht municipality, and he also manages programs in Morocco. He has developed 3 programs to support women at work, and is also working on alternative funding with programs such as AGI and LionsGeek. And the VVOB strengthens the educational system in the whole world, and it also strengthens the people working in the field of education, primary education, secondary, technical, vocational training in Latin America, in Africa, and in Belgium. And here, Mr. Sven Veron has been a director for quite many years. He's acquired a lot of experience in the field of international affairs. And before being the director of VVOB, he was working as the person responsible of programs at international level, and is also been responsible for programs at Plan International Belgium. So I now give you the floor. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the floor to start. I would like to thank the Minister for Cooperation as well for the introduction on this Educate conference. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, dear partners, dear friends, for welcoming you here as the new director of APF. And it is a real pleasure for me to meet with you today for this annual conference of Educate that supports decent work by putting women and the youth at the heart of our concerns. As a new director of APF, I would like to confirm that decent work is part and parcel of the principles and values that we defend through our programs. I've been a manager of programs in the field for 10 years, and I'm now a director. And because of that, I can assure you that the well-being of our staff, whether in the field or at the headquarters of our organization, is a major concern. And personally, I consider that it is very important. And in our programs, I've always tried to have an approach of human resources in order to strengthen the well-being of our teams. And it was also the case of Stéphane Plumat, who was a director before me, and it will continue to be so with me now. I've worked in the framework of many programs to support training, vocational training and technical training in our partners' countries. And in 2013, we started working on the development of the employability of women and the young people. It is a new approach that has inspired different people working in the field of cooperation. And we've tried to strengthen 2 principles of decent work. We have programs in Morocco, in Senegal, and in Benin. We have vocational training in Rwanda, in Palestine. And these programs contribute to generating fair incomes for vulnerable populations by improving working conditions, by encouraging personal development, by the formalization of the informal sector through social protection,
et la lutte contre l'exclusion sociale et la pauvreté. L'éducation,
and by fighting against social exclusion and poverty. Education is important for countries with low incomes, and the World Labour Organization has shown that the lack of education puts the young people in vulnerable jobs in the informal sector quite often. If you want to develop a sustainable approach, a resilient approach that focuses on the human for the future of work, it is important to promote challenges and possibilities in the field of decent work in the educational sector. Now, in the framework of this Educate annual conference, we've decided to share with you a presentation about a partnership that was supported by 2MTV, LionsGeek as a partner, but also by the Walloon region through the General Delegation Wallonie-Bruxelles in Morocco, and the APF. It is a project that develops the needs and decent work, but I'm not going to say more than that because we have with us today a representative of this LionsGeek organization. And to end my intervention, as you said, unfortunately, there was a very sad event last night, and therefore we cannot meet together in the same room. But I would like to thank Enabel for organizing things, and I would like to repeat that it is a pleasure for me to be there for the first time as the APF director, and I can assure you that APF will continue giving its support to projects dealing with decent work and education. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Benoit. I'll give the floor to Sven.
Good morning to everyone joining us here today online. It has already been said, but because of the tragic events that took place yesterday in Brussels, we had to cancel the in-person part of the conference today. But I'm really happy that we can continue here online, and I would like to thank the organizers, because I know that they have put a lot of work into this very morning to make this happen. And of course, our thoughts are with the families of the victims. Nonetheless, I would like to welcome you at this year's Educate conference. And once again, I'm really happy with the team that was chosen by the member organizations of Educate, and for multiple reasons. First of all, the choosing education and decent work as a team is a clear choice to leave silos behind and to open a dialogue between two different sectors. Two different sectors that heavily rely on each other, and two different sectors that are pivotal to realize the full potential of young people. And our two keynote speakers of today from ADEA and ILO clearly reflect this choice. From the perspective of their specific sector, they will focus on how both sectors are interrelated and how together we can really create or generate a big impact on the life of people. We need to make a difference, and we need to make that difference now. And that's the second reason why I feel that this year's theme is so fitting. When looking at the demographics of a vast majority of countries like India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and many other countries, it is very clear that in the next years to come, there will be a major influx of young people into the world of work. So if governments and other stakeholders can ensure that this transition will be successful, this will likely lead to sustainable growth. But if we fail, this will create another crisis, a profound crisis. So there is no choice. The sectors of education and work need to come together. And we need to bridge the gaps that are still existing between both sectors. And once more, education has a pivotal role to play. But we should ask ourselves, is the education sector ready? Are schools and TVET institutions preparing young people in the ways that will be needed? Do young people acquire the necessary transferable technical and digital skills to get a decent job? Does the education sector provide enough attention to entrepreneurial skills? These are all important questions that will be tackled during the conference today. And not only today, because Romeo already mentioned in the introduction that in the next weeks to come, Educate is organizing online practical sessions. And each session will focus on a specific topic related to education and decent work. So you're all very much invited to join these sessions during the month of November. To conclude, I would like to add 2 words to the title of this year's conference. Let's make it Education and Decent Work for All. Because all too often the aspirations of young people are disregarded because of gender or other personal characteristics. And if we are really serious about realizing the full potential of all young people, we cannot tolerate this. And that's why I'm also happy to announce you that in a few months' time, VVOB will, together with several partners, launch a new open resource on gender responsive pedagogy in TVET. And this resource will provide examples of good practice of gender responsive pedagogy from around the world and demonstrate how TVET can promote equity and equality in practical terms. But that's for later. So for today, I wish you a very interesting conference full of learning and sharing. Thank you.
Merci Benoît et Sven. Vous avez...
Thank you very much, Benoît et Sven. I think that you've already given food for thought and told us about what we can think about today. We're now going to turn to the 2 keynote speakers. You're in Brussels, and we are sorry you cannot be in the room. We will give the floor to Christine. Christine is a team leader on skills for social inclusion. She works with the ILO in Geneva. She's in charge of research projects in order to strengthen skills and training approaches. They include people with disabilities, workers of the informal sector, LGBT people in very difficult contexts. Christine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for the invitation, and thank you so much to Educate for choosing the topic of decent work, which is really at the heart of what the ILO does. So it's really with great pleasure and honor that I speak about decent work to you. So Albert from ADEA, who will be coming after me, and we agreed that I would be spending a bit more time talking about the concept of decent work and talking about SDG 8 with all its indicators, and leave the main country examples to him, but I'll also point to 2 small ILO examples. Now, what is decent work? As you can see on this seemingly complex slide, it is a combination of many things. If you look at ILO instruments, and you know we're a standard-setting organization. We exist since 1919, so for over 100 years. If you look at our standards before 1999, you will not find the word decent work. It was only introduced in 1999 by our Director General as a report to the International Labour Conference. And he spoke about those 4 dimensions, and they're still as valid now. There is social protection, there is rights at work, there is employment, productive employment, and there's social dialogue. So I'll start with the 2 top ones, which are maybe a bit easier to operationalize. So social protection, what does it mean? It means people need to be protected, have their basic needs met. And we have an instrument, a recommendation on social protection flaws. Recommendation 202, one of our international labor standards. So you find all the guidance in there. What does a social protection flaw mean? Decent work cannot exist without protection. Rights at work. They were mentioned by your minister as well. The ILO has 190 conventions on different aspects of the world of work, but 5 fundamental principles and rights at work. And what's different about these? Any ILO, any country that joins the ILO as a member automatically needs to abide by these 5 fundamental principles that have core conventions attached to them. And those are freedom of association and collective bargaining, elimination of all forms of forced labor, no child labor, equality and non-discrimination, and now the latest addition has been occupational safety and health at work. This has also been elevated to the level of a fundamental principle and right at work only last year. So all those rights need to be abided by. Now, what about those 190 other standards? Well, it's the choice of a country to ratify those. When they ratify them, they need to be put into national law. But if they don't ratify them, well, they need to report to the ILO from time to time, but they are not part of the rights at work that are valid in this country. So that's important. The fundamental ones are. Now, when we talk about employment, we talk about both an individual level of decent work for people and a more economy-wide level. So what does that mean? Well, a job for an individual can only be decent if it pays a decent wage. If it's a person working informally, not earning enough to feed their family, this is definitely not a decent job. Yet we also need an environment that creates employment. So in an environment where we do not have, employment policies that work towards the creation of decent jobs and good working conditions, we cannot speak of decent work in that country. So I think that's an interesting twist, I think, to this dimension. And in addition to the wage dimension, there's also the personal fulfillment and career development dimension in there. So if someone has good skills, but is not able to make use of these skills in his or her job, they would also not consider their job to be decent. So there is this individual dimension as well. And now, maybe the most complex one, that's social dialogue. Why is social dialogue one of the dimensions? First of all, we have the fundamental principle and right, that's freedom of association. So we need people to be able to organize and have their voice heard. But for a functioning labor market, we need dialogue between the key actors in the labor market. So for social dialogue to work and to be able to shape the labor market in this country, we need strong organizations of employers and of workers. And we need institutions including on TVET, skills development, that involve these players so that we have social dialogue. Now, there was a long explanation, right? But it's a complex concept. The Sustainable Development Goal 8 try to operationalize some of these elements into different indicators. And SDG 8 calls for sustained, inclusive, sustainable economic growth with full and productive employment and decent work for all, as we've just heard presented from Sven, decent work for all. And our colleagues here, this year, when they needed to produce a report on where we stand globally on the advancement of SDG 8, they thought, well, actually just looking at number 8 is not enough, because you have different other SDGs that also have a very strong influence on whether we achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all. And so they added several indicators from SDG 15 and 4 certainly as well, and 10, along 3 dimensions: environmental, economic, and social. And the sad truth is that on 15 out of the 23 indicators they chose, we see very insatisfactory progress. So the progress is either poor or very poor. And we only have a couple where we have good and moderate progress. Now, one of the indicators that the ILO tracks is the NEET indicator. So young people not in education, training, or employment. And the data that was published last year in our Global Employment Trends for Youth report that comes out every 2 years, so next year there'll be the next edition, we see that every 5th young person is among the NEETs. And you can see, so that's the red bars. And the difference that was made in this chart was between those NEETs that still actively look for employment, so they would be listed as unemployed, and those that are discouraged and do not even look for employment anymore. And then you have those employed, certainly the older age group from 20 to 24, you have more in employment. Among the younger ones, you have more in education. But you can see a clear gender divide. And if we look at data from the different regions, the dark blue dot, the women, is always higher than the dot for men, except for Northern America, where 14% of men and 40% of women are among the NEETs. Now, we certainly have this pattern because women still take on more care responsibilities, but there could also be other sociocultural factors and discouragement of women to join the labor market that are behind this. And if you look at the Arab states, for example, with 51% of women, of young women being out of the labor market, there are definitely multiple factors explaining this. And this is the group that's really furthest away from decent work. Now I'd like to give you 2 examples of how the ILO operationalizes strategies to address the need, but also the overall challenge of bringing young people into decent work. So we have the Youth Employment Action Plan from 2020 to 2030. And you have 5 dimensions on the left side that go back to the ILO's call for action on youth employment. And you have the 3 dimensions, the green ones on the right-hand side, that go back to the Future of Work report that the ILO published in 2019. And so employability, education is one of those pillars on the left. There's also entrepreneurship. There are employment policies and protection policies that are there, rights at work, and labor market policies. So all of these need to go together and form the conducive environment for youth employment to happen. And so they need to be integrated. It's very important. And we need to have those policies, we usually refer to as active labor market policies, that try to fix the problem, But we also need to have those educational policies that prevent the problem from happening, so that prevent dropout, discouragement, etc. The ILO also adopted last year a skills and lifelong learning strategy with 5 pillars, focusing on the most important elements ILO constituents have picked to advance skills and lifelong learning for decent work. And that's skills policies, governance and financing, and you have social dialogue element in there, strengthening skill needs intelligence, so everything that relates to skill needs, identification and anticipation, innovative and flexible learning pathways, inclusive skills programs, quality apprenticeships, and work-based learning. And so if these elements are all strengthened and come together, they would contribute to decent work through a number of socioeconomic impacts, as you see listed here, including the green and digital transitions. And then ultimately, support the achievement of the SDG 8 and some of the other indicators. So 2 examples, I brought one from Bangladesh and the other one from Brazil. In Bangladesh, the ILO has been working for many years on supporting TVET reforms. We strengthened a lot of actors, supported the creation of an apex body that coordinates skills development, strengthened the quality management system within Bangladesh, introduced recognition of prior learning systems, apprenticeship and work-based learning. And so several of the approaches and models that have been introduced are being used by other big programs with the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, etc. So Bangladesh, and we also have sort of the accompanying programs on compliance, on working conditions, on social dialogue, and now on social protection, where you can really see an overall package sort of the type of support needed in a way to move towards more decent work and a conducive environment. And this is a very small intervention, but one I very much like because it targets a specifically vulnerable group of people. It's transgender people. And here, also interestingly, the ILO did not choose an approach to mix them with others, but it was a program only created for transgender people because they face so much discrimination in society. It's a work-based learning program with very nice and activating methodologies and with a well-known chef that gives visibility to the project, with good partnership with local actors and the Ministry of Labour fully supporting to have a work-based learning program for transgender people who are now working as chefs in local restaurants in Brazil. And I thank you very much for your attention, again for the invitation. I look forward to discussing with you to advance decent work for all.
Merci Christine, merci pour cette présentation très éclairée.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you for this very clear presentation, and thank you for the quality of your work. I would like to remind participants that you can put your questions in the chat window, and I will introduce Mr. Albert Nsengiyumva, Executive Secretary Executive of the Association for Development in Africa. He has a lot of experience in terms of research on ICT and has been working with the Rwandese government for 18 years. He was minister in charge of infrastructure and Ministry of State in charge of CFTP in the Ministry for Education. I give you the floor.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me as my colleague Christine just did it. I would like, first of all, to thank you, Educate, and more specifically, Mahdi, whom organized everything for our stay here. And I would also like to express how sad I am for the families who've lost people last night. It's really a pity that we are in such a situation, but we also have to adapt to this kind of situation. So I'm going to try and complete what Christine just presented. That is the concept of decent work. And I will try to better understand how the African continent reacted. And I tried to find some examples. It's not easy, but examples of countries that tried to adapt the model of the ILO, the concept of decent work. It's not an easy task because when you have four very important elements like that in a context where it's already very difficult to run things. So before talking about this, I would like to say what is ADEA, what is this association, and I have 2 or 3 slides quite quickly to explain this. So ADEA is a platform that was created within the World Bank to facilitate the coordination of donors in the field of education in Africa. It started 35 years ago, and then ADEA started working with the UNESCO in Paris, and that is when it became a political dialogue platform for training and education. And finally, ADEA could then start working in Africa, and today it is the African Development Bank that is supporting us. ADEA is a political dialogue forum, as I said. It's also a network of decision makers, of practitioners and researchers. So we create opportunities to have a political dialogue in order to try and develop training and education of quality on the continent. We also support partnerships between education ministers and the partners of development. We examine topics such as vocational training, that is a topic today, fundamental training, the development of young children, so on and so forth. And we also try to act as a catalyzers because we have to accelerate the educational reforms. The world of work is evolving, and so the education world should evolve as well. But unfortunately, the rhythm is not the same, so we have to create some opportunities. We have to lobby and we have to promote the knowledge, the skills and the qualifications that are essential. Concerning the structure, we have an executive committee with ministers representing the various countries, the development partners and other actors. We also try to invite the private sector. We work with associations of the youth and women. And within this committee, we have an executive committee with which I work on a regular basis with representatives of the different organizations that I've already mentioned. We also have a secretariat of the World Bank, the World Development Bank, and we also have quality departments for the different topics. Now, what are the main activities of ADEA in 2023? We are developing a new strategic plan between 2023 and 2027. And I mentioned this because ADEA was always a platform to encourage the dialogue, but there were some things missing, because if you have a political dialogue platform, then there are recommendations, but then what happens? And we realize it's important to support the states and countries in order to translate the recommendations into actions. We can have political meetings, we can have capacity building activities, well, depending on the partners and the means available. And we are also operating a transition because we are becoming an international organization with a legal status as such. And we were limited as a project, and we realized it was very important to have a legal status so that we can further develop. Now, I'm not going to discuss all the things we're working on, but let's say that concerning today's meeting, there are 2 or 3 important activities. First of all, we are carrying a study on what we call the professionalization of secondary education. Because in secondary education, well, children are, when they end their studies, are supposed to enter the labor market. And the usual practice is that a student would go to higher education or to a university. But we realize that the labor market is not necessarily waiting for people to end their university studies. And more specifically in Africa, technicians are very important. But you have a limited number of places in education, in the higher education system. So we try to include vocational training at secondary school so that if a student ends this kind of education and doesn't have the possibility to continue, then have the possibility to enter the labor market with the possibility to still be trained and educated. And we have to work with the families in order to achieve that, because we have to understand that not all young people have to go to university. And another point is that we have to review the programs to integrate what we call the soft skills. So we've launched this kind of policy because there was a very strong evolution of the young people in the world of education, and we realized that we always took into account the supply of workers, but we also have to take into account the demand of the labor market. Secondly, we've just launched a project called development of reliable data, because we have a problem of data, particularly concerning the education system in Africa. Why? Well, there are different reasons. There is a lack of coordination between the different institutions. You have the education ministry. In some countries, you have 4 or 5 ministries responsible for education. There is a lack of coordination. And the ministry basically responsible is going to work on that, and we'll have some data, and then a ministry working on technical development will have some data. And so we have to ensure that there is a continuum between education, training, and employment. So it means that we have to coordinate all the data we have. And it is something that is related to the initiative that we are presenting here. Then another initiative concerning the integration of new technologies in training and education. Because 20 years ago, it was the difficult access, but things have evolved. We have technologies, but we have to take advantage of the digital technologies in the world of education and training. And the labor market is changing a lot today. Well, we are meeting online because of the events, because it's possible to do that. But in the educational programs and training programs, you also have to make sure that the new technologies are used. And we work a lot on this. We work with other partners in order to create startups in the field of digital education. So these are the examples I wanted to share. Now, let's come back to the topic of today. And I'd like to continue where Christine started, and I'll take the example of Benin. because I like to present very concrete cases here. So I have re-examined the situation in Benin. It was a program that was launched by the ILO for more social justice to build up the future of work in Africa. And there were three main areas. First, the strengthening of the social dialogue, as was explained, then the extension of social protection, then the promotion of employment, and there were two categories in that, the youth and women that were mentioned by Christine. And we know that in Africa, those two categories of people are very important. If you talk about development, you have to take into account those two categories. So that's what Benin tried to do with the support of the ILO. Now, I'm not sure that it is readable, but there was a diagnosis of the national context that was established in 2018, and we see here the elements that were obtained. A deficit concerning the work and a very strong level of underemployment, and it affects more particularly the youth. There is a lack of complementarity and of consultation, of coordination. That's very important because education and training are part of a certain sector. And when you talk about social dialogue, you have the employment ministry. When you deal with the topic of entrepreneurship or companies, it's another ministry. So coordination is needed between the different players. And that is seriously lacking. And at the same time, it's very important. So a good coordination is important. Then the low control of information concerning the labor market, because we know that in Africa, well, the labor market is essentially informal. So to deal with decent work while not taking into account the fact that the labor market is essentially an informal labor market is not possible. So the context is very important. Now, the lack of social protection for the workers, even for the formal sector, the lack of compliance with the international standards of work. That's also a reality. So this diagnosis for me led to three important things in the framework of this context element. First, the concept that the ILO is trying to promote is not by itself a rule that can be applied to any context. What I mean is that it is the end of a process. So a country has to reach a certain point to guarantee decent work, and it needs support to get there. And this, of course, requires to examine the continuum, as I said, education, training, employment. It's going to require coordination between the various players. It's going to require the involvement of the production sector as well in order to make sure that the basic learning through work is guaranteed. But we have to work with companies to do that, and I've participated to that process, but it's very difficult. Now, in the private sector, on the labor market, there is an important recognition of the role of the promotion of quality at work. Because unfortunately, the private sector is essentially focusing on profit. So competition indeed is important, but it is important to ensure the quality, a minimum of quality at work. And this can only be done working in partnership. Now, trying to go further, I have re-examined the work of a survey on the life conditions of households in Benin. Because the context is very important for our population. If you want to deal with the problem of decent work, women should be focused on. And we see that women represent 47% of the available workforce. But in most countries, women represent a higher proportion of the population as compared to men. Then the low level of education, it is one of the main problems for women to access work. So the topic of women and their education is very important, particularly here in Benin. Now, I'd like to come back to the recommendations afterwards, but I would like to present first a video that did not follow a model, but it's a very important example. And then I'll come back to my PowerPoint presentation. So here, what I wanted to show you is the fact that we try to find answers to the questions related to decent work, working in a sector, in this case, the wood sector. So I participated to that initiative in cooperation with the German private sector that is working in the field of wood. We created a technical school specialized in wood technology in the rural world. And the problem that I had observed is that the German people applied the concept of quality of training. It was a formal training with a reduced number of people. But the number of people was important for me. So if you tell me that you can have only 15 students per class when I have 10,000 people to be trained, it's very difficult. But there's also the problem of cost. So why is it a good model? Well, it's because they created a link with the association sector. So the associations working with the informal sector have worked with this initiative in order to improve the quality of work through training. So this is the training model that I wanted to develop here. And I insist on this because there is a link between this project in the rural world, that is a world that has to be protected, but you have associations involved. Here, a representative of an association signing a certificate, and then the government is also present through different ministries. And so we can create a real partnership for decent work. So you have to associate the various players, particularly when there are important job opportunities. So I'll come back to my conclusions. First of all, we have to value initial training and continuous training. For me, that's very important. You cannot talk about many things if you do not have the protection of training as such. Then you have to improve the partnership between the different players. You have to identify those different players. It's an example that I just showed to you a minute ago. Then you have to adapt the concept of decent work as defined by the ILO to the local context, because each country has its specificities. And we have to work progressively in order to reach the objective we have. Then we have to identify the sectors that we can focus on and invest in training, coordination, and promotion of a job that is well paid. Because we observe that in the African context, many people are poor, and they are poor workers because they do not earn enough money. They cannot give food to their family. So it's very difficult to work in that context. So we have to promote the quality at work. We have to promote training, and we have to make sure that a minimum salary is paid for decent work. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much for your attention.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur Nsengiyumva, pour cette
Thank you
présentation.
very much, Mr. Nsengiyumva, for presenting the work you've been doing. I have tried to select a few questions that appeared in the chat window. I'm going to present these questions to you as best as I can. I hope not to betray the spirit of these questions. We have 5 to 10 minutes to answer these questions. We have 3 kinds of questions. First of all, for you, Christine, the link between decent work and the associative sector or the informal sector. Do you think that it is possible to make these two sectors meet or not? Albert, you mentioned the fact that schools and companies need to be similar, and you use the example of Benin and the people in charge of the contacts between schools and companies. Is it important to foster our reflection? And a third kind of question is to see if we need to focus on very specific skills and try to strengthen these skills to give young people a competitive advantage on the continent, skills related to innovation, entrepreneurship, and adaptability. So these are the 3 kinds of questions that we received. Christine, if you want to answer first, and then Albert. Christine, you have the floor.
Thanks for the questions. So luckily, we also have a recommendation on transitions to formality. So there is an international labor standard already in place that is the result of a 2-year-long discussion between our tripartite constituents. So for those who want to look it up, it's recommendation 204. The social protection for is 202. So what does this recommendation say? First of all, it recognizes the innovative potential of people in the informal economy. So I think that's very important because we have seen a lot of policies that try to abolish informality in the past, decades, and they never worked. So this document, this recommendation, says that there are a lot of different policies needed to support the transition towards formality. And formality and informality is not a black and white concept. There are many different shades of gray. And skills play a very important role. There's access to education and training. There is the recognition of skills acquired informally, also through informal apprenticeship. There's a lot of work the ILO has done on this as well. Also using skills as a way to incentivize businesses to formalize. So, and there's definitely always the dimension of overcoming, information asymmetry. So many people don't even know how to formalize. So that's the very, very first step. And the recommendation says, so on the one hand, we need to create more formal jobs. We need to avoid the informalization of formal jobs. And we need to support the transition from informal to formal employment. And it's also very important that we understand, so that in this recommendation, informal economy is defined, and the ILO works with statistical definitions that include both informal employment in the informal sector, so in businesses that are informal, but we also have informal employment in the formal sector. And that share So it depends very much on the country. And this week, so just to make a little bit of promotion and alert you, this week, the International Conference of Labor Statisticians is ongoing in Geneva, which is a meeting that happens only every 5 years. And one of the agenda topics is the definition of informality. So we might see some change in the definition as well.
Ok, je vous remercie. Monsieur Nsengiyumva?
Mr. Nsengiyumva? Yes, thank you very much. That question is quite complex. We have to confess that it is quite complex because, as I said in my presentation, the concept of decent work, well, it is something that we consider as an achievement. What comes after efforts, you know, education and training, and they have to be adapted to the country. The fact that you become aware of the of employment, of the private sector, the importance of a decent work. But, you know, there is a conflict with the idea of profit. We need to reach a balance between these elements and the need for working together, partnership, as I said in my presentation. To be very specific, when I mentioned the example of the wood sector, I wanted to insist on the importance of working per sector. I worked at the Ministry of Education and Vocational Training. We launched these sector skill concern. So the objective was to show to what point, to what extent it is possible to become aware of the need for improving the offer of training and quality at work, because these two elements allowed the system to be productive. The salary depends on productivity, especially in the private sector. But to answer the question, we need to understand that without that partnership and the and if all actors do not take up their responsibilities, it is impossible to achieve the objectives. And the role of the partners in development is to make this dialogue easier. We worked with the German cooperation at the time, the PPP, Public-Private Partnership Dialogue. And this element gave us the possibility to mobilize the private sector so that the private sector could be much more involved in the initial training and the improvement of lifelong training. So in a nutshell, it is important to see the different elements that you have to take into consideration to better adapt education to the needs of the work labor market, which requires the involvement of the private sector to work per sector for a specific sector to develop a model that could be emulated in other sectors. But we need models. That is very important. And finally, the central role of government in the coordination of the different ministries, as I said, because, well, government is essential in defining policies, pieces of legislation, etc. So the combination of these elements can give us the possibility to achieve a decent work in the African context. Thank you.
Si, je vois.
Thank you.
Possible? Because
Je vous en prie, Madame Hofmann.
okay. Thank you very much.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
I was reminded by my colleague Albert of a very important sort of new instrument that I absolutely should have mentioned. So this year, the International Labour Conference has adopted a new recommendation on quality apprenticeships. This is recommendation 208, and that brings the role of employers in developing skills that are demanded by the market really at the forefront. And it has a lot of interesting insights. I mean, again, it's tripartite agreed language around the protection of apprentices, but also the promotion of quality apprenticeships in the role in promoting decent work. Thanks.
Et c'était au moment où vous posiez, où vous interveniez, Madame Hofmann, une des questions qui
Yes,
était
and it was one of the questions that appeared.
People. J'ai également des remarques aussi sur le.
I also have comments on the importance and the need for scaling up the efforts when you see the amount of needs that reach the labor market. Every year in different contexts, we have figures that we have received, and these figures are about Senegal. My proposal would be to invite you both to stay with us for the next panel. We'll have two presentations, a very specific case on the multifactorial approach linked with the employability of young people, and I'll turn back to you again after the second panel. If you agree, let's start the second part of our presentations, and in this part dedicated to employability of young people, we'll first have a presentation by the HIVA Research Center, KU Leuven, a multidimensional approach of young people's employability, the capacity of young people to access, to find a job and to keep it. And then we'll have another presentation of LionsGeek, a project developing Casablanca, and Mahdi is going to give this presentation. That is the what we mentioned at the beginning. After these two interventions, you'll have the possibility to ask questions to the members of the panel, and we'll come back to the different issues mentioned. I would like to introduce Elena and Evelien from the KU Leuven. Yes, Elena Alonso has a PhD in economy for development. She's been working since 2020. She works on social protection and decent work, the human rights, civil society, and sustainability in a context of international cooperation. She has a PhD in social and cultural anthropology and a PhD in philosophy and international relationships at the university in South Africa. She takes part to research projects at the national and international level on decent work, poverty reduction, and artistic training. Elena and Evelien, you have the floor for your presentations.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm just making sure, yes, there we go, that I can see you. Good morning to you all. I'm very pleased that we have you, policymakers, practitioners, and researchers with us who want to understand and address the complexities that make the labor market a rather tough place for young people. The objective of this talk is to find ways to improve young people's chances at work, while also improving their experiences with work and how this work capacitates them to enhance their lives inside and outside of the professional context. We want to discuss the potential benefits of a multidimensional youth employability index. And in this presentation, we will clarify why we believe that the concept of employability can actually enhance youth strategies. We will also introduce our index that can measure employability and which we can kind of see as a tool for gaining a deeper understanding. And finally, we'll explore how this index and the information it provides can be valuable, like people to you, policymakers and practitioners. And we'll also touch on the potential benefits for young people who are involved in the program. You can go to the next slide, please, where we look at employability. So the term has been mentioned by Christine before as well. And it's indeed a term, employability, that's widely used to describe a kind of path to success for young people in the labor market. It's based on the idea that the more employable people are, the better their chances to find a job, to perform well, and to achieve positive life outcomes. I think we all have a general idea of what employability means. If I were to ask every one of you who you probably could give a kind of description, and most likely your definitions would involve skills and education, because these aspects receive a lot of attention in the policy and literature on the subject. And as an audience of educational practitioners, you also might be a bit biased, of course. But by the end of this talk, I hope to broaden the kind of perspective on employability, that there is more to it than only skills and education. And we use in our research the ideas of McCabe and Lindsay to define employability. They see employability as an interplay between a person's qualities, their personal situation, but also the surrounding conditions that increase the chances of finding, keeping, and advancing a job. Now, it's a good thing, I think, that intuitively employability captures an idea we can work with across disciplines and sectors. This is the first reason why, in our view, employability is worthwhile further exploring. The second reason is that employability, rather than employment, for example, seems to aim for a bigger picture that somehow extends beyond the here and the now. Employability as a concept kind of tries to grasp something about the future opportunities of youngsters as well. And this bigger picture of employability implies as well that we can acknowledge that the realities of employment and unemployment are not necessarily the sharp opposites they seem to be on paper, because we know very well that many forms of work exist. We've heard it from the previous presenters as well, formal, informal, in various ways. And that besides youth who experience long stretches of unemployment, there are also many young people who move in and out of jobs more quickly, of various quality, and obviously the link with decent work has to be made here, or who take part in public work and training programs. And therefore, rather than looking at a snapshot of the outcome, for example, being employed or being unemployed, employability allows to build a picture that includes the interaction of factors and circumstances at the individual level, but also of the household where youngsters live and even their neighborhood. Factors that together shape and are shaped by how likely this person is to progress to the labor market, find a job, stay in a job, and move on in employment. And we draw on McCabe and Lindsay's work, which provides an inclusive definition of employability that is suited for contexts where many young people lack skills and face structural inequalities in many different ways. And this definition allows us to focus on the most vulnerable young individuals and address their unique needs and challenges. You may go to the next slide, please, where we look. You can click through all the way. Yeah, there we look at the link between employability and decent work. And the truth is, when we developed the paper, decent work was not one of our kind of frameworks. But obviously, there are many linkages between employability and decent work. Because as Christine already mentioned, decent work is not just about getting a job. It's also about having opportunities to grow and advance in your career and as a person. And employability ensures that young people can access these opportunities. Employability and decent work create a mutual reinforcing dynamic that empowers young people not only to enter the workforce, but so to also thrive within it, foster their personal and professional development, and also contribute to the more conducive environment, as it's been said, to a more inclusive and prosperous labor market. A big part of employability is having the right skills and qualifications, and education and training are crucial for young people to develop these skills and be ready for the workforce. But however, the most vulnerable youth require attention to more than skills and education, as our results will show. And I think this is one of the main points we would like to make today. If you go to the next slide, we talk about, thank you, the motivation for why we've built the index. And even though there is a range of indicators that people use and are actually also very useful to track and monitor young people's outcomes in work, Employability offers the advantage of providing this bigger picture that can be compiled for all these categories. We can talk about the employability of an unemployed youngster as much as we can talk about the unemployability of an unemployed youngster. Yet the reason why employability has remained quite vague, maybe its lack of measurement, and it's been hard to operationalize, and this complicates the understanding of what drives low employability. The idea of an employability index came about by seeing that multidimensional research is gaining momentum because it captures exactly those interconnections between various dimensions of life and outcomes of opportunities. There was no such tool for employability, and we wanted to explore its potential to optimize and support follow-up for the most excluded and fragile youth populations. If you go to the next slide, we will quickly talk through the methodology. So our index follows the Elkair and Foster method that underlies the multidimensional poverty index, which is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is widely used. We use this same method to develop a measure. This method, the Elkair and Foster method, has also been used in other applications, for example, an happiness and well-being index in Bhutan. And we just mentioned this to illustrate that it has a wide application in all sorts of research contexts. For all these applications, it's the same methodology of selecting dimensions and indicators. And we refer to the paper we wrote with our colleagues in Cape Town as well, for the full methodology, because it would take us too far to explain here. But let me just say this, that going through the method, you end up generating 3 different measures, and you can see them on the slide as well. H stands for the headcount ratio and tells you who falls behind in employability, people with low employability. The A stands for intensity of the problem. And lastly, there is the adjusted headcount ratio, which is a number between 0 and 1, a little bit like the Gini coefficient, that in itself is hard to understand, but becomes quite useful when comparing or tracking groups. Besides these measures, it's also possible to calculate the contribution of each indicator and each dimension to employability outcomes. And this then can be done for the entire group of young people, but also you can look at subgroups like urban or rural youth, gender, or according to labor market status, so employment, unemployment, discouraged, and so on. In other words, you can start to build an entire information platform. The index that we will present just now is a case study, and it's tailored to South Africa. We use the data of the 10% census 2011 sample, which is freely available. We apply the international youth definition of 15 to 24 years old, cleaned the data, and arrived at a sample of just under 800,000 youth, which represents 9 million youth. And now I'll give the word to Elena, please.
Thank you, Evelien. Again, we will not go into every methodological detail of this index, but this slide shows a little bit what kind of dimensions and indicators the index takes into account. And you see on the one hand, the different dimensions that we consider, and then within these dimensions, the specific indicators that build the index. And as you can see, we look much further than only economic opportunities or education. The index also considers physical health, well-being of the young person. It also looks at social capital, so connections that the young person has to the labor market within its family, for instance, but also what is happening around the young person and among its peers in the neighborhood. And then finally, we also look at specifically connectivity commodities, because both in the general literature and in literature specific for South Africa, we see that certain things are really very important to be able to obtain and maintain a job. Things like access to the internet, but also having a car. And so all of these variables we measure in specific ways that are relevant for the South African context. And we use this information to build an overall index, as Evelien has already explained. And very importantly, we really want to emphasize that the index is really designed to look not only at the individual level or the individual attributes of someone, but really at the broader family, community, neighborhood environment as well. Next slide, please. Here we immediately jump to the results, since this is the crux of all our efforts. And here we want to show already how widely different the index results can be when you start to split up young people into different kinds of groups. Next slide. Here we highlight the differences between different population groups in South Africa. And as you can see, the results are vastly different. What is interesting, though, is if we proceed one step more, is that even though the differences in the number of people who we identify as having low employability is very different, when we look at the intensity, this means the number of indicators where the young person is deprived, they're actually quite similar. So in common language, this means that once young people are in that category of having low employability, actually they are suffering deprivation in many of the same indicators or to the same extent, which means that you have clustered disadvantages, which means that certain indicators will play a big role across different population groups. If we proceed one slide more, there we want to highlight the differences between young people living in rural areas and urban areas, mostly because there the difference is just vast. And this, of course, again, masks a lot of more local heterogeneities. We also see in the results that even urban youth are often in the category of low employability. So being in an urban area does not necessarily protect you against all deprivations or different types of deprivations, but at the overall level, there is definitely a very big difference. Next slide, please. Here we focus on different groups defined by employment status and by the sector in which young people work. And if we go one step further, we again want to highlight the big differences in the index results for instance, youth who are considered to be employed, unemployed, or discouraged. And here we see the same phenomenon appearing, that the number of people who are considered employability deprived is different, although still relatively high in the employed category. But the intensity of deprivation, the number of indicators on which people are deprived, is less different. And this again points to the fact that there are really certain types of disadvantages, vulnerabilities, or deprivations that appear across different categories and even among employed youth. Next slide, please. Also, if we split up our sample, sorry, the previous one, yeah. Also, if we split up our sample into young people working in the informal economy and the formal economy, again, we see different results. But it is not so clear that people who are employed in the formal economy are much better off or much less vulnerable than those in the informal sector. Again, it depends a lot on what we are looking at and what the other characteristics are of these young people. Now we can go to the next slide completely. Here we just want to show you a little bit what the influence is of our different dimensions and indicators of deprivation or vulnerability. And perhaps as expected, economic opportunities matter a great deal. They explain about 30% of low employability. But you can see that the other dimensions also matter a lot. And actually, connectivity and social capital appear to be bigger drivers of having a low employability score than physical health and education. Of course, these are aggregate numbers. And again, we have to be very nuanced in what this means at more local levels and for different subgroups. But this illustrates a little bit the more general point that the index tries to make, that it is really very important to look at different dimensions of vulnerability and to look especially beyond the classical usual suspects of education and economic opportunities. Next slide, please. Evelien, I give the floor back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So when we look at the conclusions, we can see employed youth are less prone to low employability. So it seems to suggest that a job offers some kind of protection to low employability, which seems logical, of course. However, there remains much to study about the interaction between a job and employability, because we see that still 1 in 3 employed youth, so youth in a job, still suffers from low employability. And so a job seems not to be a guarantee for escaping low employability. We also said that low employability is largely driven by circumstances at the home and in the neighborhood where people live, and which seems to point to the need for transversal policy measures. And I think in our discussions just now, we will also come back to that. If you go to the next slide, please. Yes. Sorry, Elena, that's your slide.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh no, that's now. Yeah. Okay, Elena, go ahead.
So we wanted to emphasize another aspect of the index beyond the quantitative usefulness or the measurement advantages. And that is also what the index offers to young people in terms of approach. And a bit similar to the approach of the multidimensional poverty index and some other indexes is that it attaches more value to the perspectives, the experiences, and the voice more generally of young people. So it's perfectly capable to collect data in a way that really allows people to define for themselves what the barriers are for increasing their own employability or for accessing decent jobs. It's perfectly possible to let young people define what they think are the most important vulnerabilities that they face. And on the other hand, when the index is then constructed, it really offers a very powerful information or data-driven tool to show that young people indeed have to tackle or deal with a lot of multiple, simultaneously occurring and intersecting vulnerabilities on different dimensions. And that it is not simply a story of getting more information about the labor market or acquiring a certain type of skill, but that young people are recognized as suffering from a great deal more of multidimensional vulnerability than we sometimes acknowledge. The floor back to you, Evelien.
Yeah. Then if we go to the next slide, this brings us back to you, I think, people in the audience. That we wonder, so what does this index offer to policymakers and practitioners, among other people? And for this slide, I draw on Elkair and her experience over decades with working with policymakers. And so these points are points that she has identified for their multidimensional poverty index, but I think it applies also to this tool, the multidimensional employability index. So firstly, the index is not just a single measure like unemployment, employed, or even the needs category, but a multidimensional one that also gives insight in the incidence and intensity of the problem. And that comes with, as we said, an information platform that shows you for each indicator who and how badly and where people are vulnerable. Based on the information the index generates, we can focus on applied questions and generate what I hope are relevant resources for officials and professionals who can act on the information. For example, the map you see on the left depicts low employability across all municipalities in South Africa. And this shows you how you can visualize certain outcomes, and this can also be done for subgroups like gender and so on. In terms of budget allocation, the index can help governments by indicating the severity of the problem among groups and regions, and maybe help to plan tailored approaches according to the needs that show up. And the index emphasizes cross-sectoral connections by showing how different domains and indicators, ranging from health to transport, together drive low employability. And this could be a stepping stone, we think, to map important intermediary stakeholders in the various domains that have a role to play in tackling low employability. This can also enhance policy coordination. But there may be other things you think of, people in the audience. So if you see other ways in which this can be helpful, this index to you, yeah, I very much welcome your suggestions during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Merci Evelien et merci Elena pour cette présentation et pour
Well, thank you, Evelien and Elena, for this presentation. Thank you for presenting the results of your research on employability, the different multidimensional elements to take into account. We will come back to the question that you just raised afterwards when we have the debate. I know that you continue working on this topic, so I think it's indeed important for you to have a feedback of the participants and know what they think about your recommendations. Now, I suggest we go back to Morocco because I said that the minister is in Morocco, so I've already mentioned the name of this country, but now we're going to go back there in order to present LionsGeek with Mahdi and Inas. So Mahdi Bouziane is a management expert for NGOs for 14 years, particularly interested in education, employability, youth, and the promotion of equal opportunities. He has led and advised different Moroccan NGOs working on the field in the field of empowerment and the development of professional skills.
Première promotion, la première promotion de formation Digital Content Creator de LionsGeek. Félicitations, Inas.
You are accompanied by Inas Rhafes, who was one of the members of the first training that you organized on digital content creators. Well, thank you. Well, in fact, Ines is not with me. There will be a short video to present a testimony after my own intervention. I wanted to express my sympathy to Belgium following what happened yesterday. And thank you for giving us the opportunity of talking about LionsGeek. That is quite a recent initiative. It is a way for us to have a concrete cooperation between Morocco and Belgium. It is indeed a project that mobilizes players in both countries. LionsGeek is a solidarity ecosystem for the inclusion of the youth in the world of media and technologies. And we have decided to offer inclusive opportunities for young people who are not going to school anymore, who are in a difficult social situation or professional situation. So we tried to train them on digital content creation. And we think that these are very interesting sectors in terms of employment. There was first a success story in Brussels, and we tried to use that system of LionsGeek that was developed in Belgium. It is a kind of initiative that showed that social integration and inclusion of the youth of young people from difficult neighborhoods is something possible. So we work in this case with international partners, and we have benefited from an important support, and the region Wallonia, Brussels, and the APF have supported us as well. And we want to tackle the topic of needs in Morocco. So according to the last census of 2019, we have more or less 1.7 million individuals who are not on the labor market, not trained, not educated, and this represents one young people out of 4 young people in Morocco. So we try to create an ecosystem without barriers so that entrepreneurship is accessible to all, whatever their gender or age, whatever their origin. There are young people from a difficult neighborhood, for instance, here in Casablanca, where there are many young people who are in a difficult situation. And we think it's very important to give to each individual the possibility to develop their skills and their potential in the field of technologies, information, and the media. Our intervention model is based on three main pillars. First of all, the training. So we offer this training in our center. So training on new technologies and media. It's also a co-working space and an incubator. So for people who want to work on their ideas, and we also organize events that we hope are going to be inspiring for the young people, so that people feel curious. And for April this year, we have organized two trainings, coding development and digital content creation and digital marketing. So this is a training that we offer for free, and it doesn't require specific training of the people who attend. So we've had for the first round 40 young boys and girls. And starting next Monday, we're going to have the second round, and we will have close to 80 young people. The co-working space that we have organized is there for anyone who is interested in learning about development and content creation. So we have a studio that has been funded by APF so that it is possible for young people who have ideas to have access to the equipment they need in order to work on those ideas and in order to create their content. And in Morocco, the project is supported by a public TV channel. So this TV channel established the organization, and through the partnership with APF, we developed this project. And so the staff of this TV channel is also involved. The goal is to train 200 young people per year. And in the longer term, we hope to have 100 projects in the framework of the incubator. And maybe we could also organize events that will allow us to contact thousands of young people. But apart from this institutional offer, our objective is to guarantee to these young people that they have access to a decent work. We have also developed other support mechanisms. And they are as important as the rest if we want to achieve our mission, i.e. we want to help young people to create a decent work, and we want to encourage their professional inclusion. So we have developed integration tools. That is the trainings we organize, trainings focusing on theoretical elements. And someone already talked about the practice, right? And that's what we did as well, because we have this TV channel that is supporting the project. So our training is very well adapted and is also inspired by the professional practice. Then we also have some personalized support, an individualized support to help young people to find work opportunities. So we have coaching, mentoring, professional advice in order to help them developing their skills and develop strategies that are adapted to the labor market. And finally, we also encourage these young people to participate to events or workshops and also to participate to competitions. Last week, for instance, the whole class group media received a trophy It is a trophy that was given by the TV channel because of the work they did on inclusion values ads. So it gave a lot of visibility to these young people because it was a recognition. It was a possibility for them to present their advertisement and to do that in front of the whole communication sector and the audiovisual sector of Morocco. So it was a fantastic visibility for them.
Dernière chose, avant le lancement,
The last thing, before the whole project started, we also tried to identify very specific needs, and we tried to meet these needs. The first one was the access to computing tools. We have very interesting training programs, but we realized that if these young people do not have adapted hardware, it would be impossible for them to follow the training program. And I would like to thank the WBI because they helped us to buy a lot of computers so that these computers could be available to students. And if we take into consideration the experience that we've acquired, it was determining in to the success of these young people. This can have an impact on their success, and it has an impact on the fact that they remain in the program. We have advisory sessions. Sometimes we have financial support, and with that, they can overcome their personal challenges, challenges that could undermine their success. And this is something that was not foreseen when we started the project, but we strengthened the team. We hired a social worker, and they follow these. She follows the young people. Just to give you an example, we have a young mother among our beneficiaries, and we had to pay for taking care of the child, and the mother could remain in the program and could be involved in the training program. Well, this is not what we basically do, but it contributed to the success of that young mother, and that young mother could keep on learning with us. We also worked on soft skills, behavioral skills, because it is also very important when you want to get access to the labor market. We have integrated skill capacity building, especially in communication, with a Belgian platform, how to speak before an audience. So we have social support programs and development of soft skills, and we created a holistic environment, and we prepare our beneficiaries to the labor market. We avoid dropout, and we are really proud of the first promotion. Nobody gave up. So during the 6 months, all the young people followed the training program. Now they are, they're now trainees. They work with 2M and other partners. And I think that we have a short video testimony of Rhafes, one of the members of the first group, and beyond the fact that she succeeded, she has a very specific profile, and it was a challenge. She comes from another city, we had specific problems, but we solved them so that she could follow the training program and to finish the training program. And now she is in a pre-employment phase at LionsGeek. So this is the first hire, when she was part of the first group. So I'm going to, to show you the video. I'm Ines Rhafes. I'm 25 years old. I'm from UVTA, and I have a degree as a specialized technician in computing. Before, I was looking for an opportunity to develop my skills, and I found an offer, LionsGeek's offer, a free training program for young people from Casablanca, content creation and web development. And now I'm at LionsGeek. I was a trainee for 6 months. This was very interesting. We had master classes with professional people, how to use cameras, lighting, the Adobe softwares, branding, marketing, website creation. I could develop my network to trust myself and to work with in different groups. So I'm here as community manager here at LionsGeek. So thank you very much, and I'm open to questions. If you have questions, thank you, Mahdi. Thank you for this presentation. I'm just having a look at the chat to see the questions. Well, we have a question about your possible recommendations related to older workers in companies, just to strengthen the employability of, well, young people and older people. So that was the first question. And if I'm not mistaken, Christine Hofmann, well, you wanted to ask questions to Evelien and Elena before we go to the debate. So for that first question, the involvement of older workers in strengthening the employability of young people. Evelien, Elena, Mahdi, I don't know if you have comments related to that point. Mahdi? Well, just to give you an example, here at LionsGeek, we created bridges between 2Ms and LionsGeek. So we have many professionals who are contributing in a way or another to the training of these young people. They follow, they accompany them, they answer their questions. So, in our center, we have journalists, technicians, and with these people, our young people can have contact with, experienced workers, and they can develop their network. Many of our of the young people we train are now with 2Ms, learning at 2Ms. Evelien or Elena?
Sorry, so the question was about older people and their employability. Did I understand it correctly?
The role that older worker or more experienced worker within the company could play also to enhance employability of younger who join the company.
Yeah, no, so this is not something that our paper as such looked at, but I think also coming back to the apprenticeship, Christine was telling earlier about, it's obvious that people who have experience and expertise already in a job and are in the labor market have much to learn to young people who might not.
Je vous remercie. Évidemment, Pardon. Petit souci technique. Votre recherche, évidemment, elle s'adresse, elle fait ressortir le fait que que l'éducation et la formation ne jouent pas le seul rôle dans l'employabilité des jeunes. Évidemment, vous êtes ici avec le public d'éduquer, donc vous pouvez imaginer que ça va susciter des questions et des réflexions. Et donc, on a posé les questions dans le chat aussi, 3 questions pour susciter un peu la partie débat maintenant pendant les 20 prochaines minutes, pardon. Mais je vais peut-être me tourner vers Christine Hofmann et Albert Nsengiyumva. Peut-être avec ces questions dans un premier temps pour avoir un peu votre réaction par rapport à cette étude qui nous a été présentée, parce que plusieurs questions se posent. Hein. D'une part, on voit que l'étude suggère que les interventions, même si sur l'éducation et la formation, même si elles sont importantes, elles ne suffisent pas à améliorer efficacement l'employabilité des jeunes. Qu'est-ce que cela implique pour vous, pour votre programme? Il y avait une question qui était posée dans le chat aussi, qui disait que voilà, si l'éducation, si on se concentre sur les chiffres qui ont été donnés, qui montrent que le social capital joue un rôle beaucoup plus important que l'éducation et la formation pour l'employabilité des jeunes, comment changer l'approche, comment créer aussi les réponses politiques ou entre partenaires ou entre différentes approches politiques pour répondre à ces enjeux et avoir cette approche plus multidimensionnelle. Qu'est-ce que ça implique pour votre travail directement? Qu'est-ce que ça implique aussi en termes de réponses et de stratégies politiques qui peuvent être apportées? Et aussi une autre question, ben voilà, cet outil qui nous a été présenté aujourd'hui, cet indice d'employabilité, est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui peut également nourrir votre réflexion? Donc je pose d'abord la question ici à Albert et Christine, et puis on verra alors si le reste des participants en ligne souhaitent également répondre à ces questions.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions, but particularly to the presenters for their excellent inputs. So I think the index is very interesting to help evidence-based policy, right? We need to understand what the issues are in order to plan better programs. So I think it's a great contribution. Now, I would have a couple of general remarks and then respond to your questions. So, well, probably the first remark is linked to your question. Should we change the measurement of our programs? Well, I think if there's a decision to measure employability rather than employment, you know, you can do that. But there are a lot of interrelations. So if someone has a job and earns enough, obviously we would see over some time an improvement in connectivity, because many of the connectivity issues are related to low income. So if you take a decision not to consider a program successful if the person has gained a decent job, and then the question is, you know, how do we measure whether the job is decent? But then, yes, you need to collect all these indicators at the beginning and at the end. So for programming, this is also a challenge. You need good M&E systems. That costs something. But definitely it can be done. I think what will be interesting in your indicator is to also look at wage and whether people are protected and social protection, so those in employment. I haven't seen that. I also think that some of the elements in your index might need contextualization, so might need to be adapted. And in your disaggregation, I think would be very interesting, and I'm sure you have done that in the South African context and haven't presented it all, but just to mention it, looking at age, looking at geographical regions, and also looking at people with disabilities, and maybe even with other vulnerability factors, so that you can really disaggregate. and understand the context and the intersectionalities of the vulnerabilities. Because we always, assume that people within one group are the same. They're definitely not. The point on social capital, I think, is very important. But it is being addressed in most youth employment programs, I would say, that have an approach to look at supply, demand, and matching, or labor market intermediation. Because the lack of social capital can be partly overcome by counseling people, guiding them, and activating them, so teaching them how to create and expand their network. So that's one of the methods, I would say a good career counselor would utilize to help people strengthen their social capital. So, because that's something you can learn to do. I'd be quite curious to hear if, there's an issue on data availability. So if the team has looked also at some other countries, how much of the index data really is available, or how much you would have to compromise on it when looking at least developed countries, and sort of how much that could cost to come up with an index for a new country. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Merci, le modérateur.
Thank you, thank you. I'll try not to repeat what my colleague Christine has just said, but I would like to come back to a few elements because they are important. You know that you do research at a specific time in a specific context, but sometimes we ask ourselves if we would draw the same conclusions with different variables. This is the case of South Africa in a well-known environment. If we have a look at the state of the South African economy, there is a huge problem with energy, so that is related to the country's productivity. There is lack of trust. Investors do not really trust the country. So what I'm trying to say is that what you observe at a specific time, it has an impact on the way you approach employability. So that is important to keep that in mind. But anyway, as far as you are concerned, in our organization, we try to support supply more than demand. And I was, discussing that with Christine on our way here this morning. And, because of that, we have to reflect upon the way we approach our programs. This is about partnership. If we want to understand the demand at a specific time and to anticipate future demand, knowing that we have external factors that we do not control, it is true that we'll always have external factors and they will have an impact on the level of employability at a specific time. But anyway, I'm going to repeat what I was saying before. Our role is always, to encourage the stakeholders, government, productive sector, and the other stakeholders. We want to encourage them to join forces in order, to finalize the value chain. What I call the value chain So is it about giving more education and training to, to have results? Well, no, not immediately. You have to focus on demand, because demand will give you a chance to improve the good policies and your methodology. So this is also about demand situation, the situation of demand. So you have, well, in a nutshell, you have to make sure that the different sectors work together, that there is a good coordination, that they define the needs, and that they create this dialogue, because with this dialogue, priorities will be sorted out. The other element, because we do some advocacy work, we need more advocacy in Africa. We need to advocate for self-employment, because, you think that we have big companies looking for workers. That's not always the case. Sometimes it is not the case at all. So that is why we need to take into consideration the context of the country. We have young people, finishing their studies, and we need to make sure that these people have what they need to create better jobs. So it's about training to entrepreneurship, the access to funds, because they need, a minimum level of funds if they want to start working. And well, that's the case in some countries. They need to get access to the market. In some countries, they gave specific markets to young people. You have that, so you get access to these markets. How can they gain experience if they're not exposed to the labor market? So that is what we need to do in terms of advocacy work. Obviously, I need to underline what you also mentioned. The concept of multidimensionality. I think that this is also important to take that into consideration. I'm going to stop here if you don't have any questions.
So the other point I wanted to refer to is that the index and the employability of the youth, and I repeat what I was saying, it's not enough to intervene in the field of training and education. I think that we have to promote even more the concept of decent employment that is adapted through policies. So the policies are the starting point. So we have to make sure that policies are defined on a multi-sectorial basis, because quite often we observe that there are some problems because a ministry has a policy responsible for education and training, and then the employment ministry has another policy, and there is no connection. So we have to try and make sure that there is a coordination between the different stakeholders at the level of the government first, and then with the private sector, and finally with all the partners who support the topic of employability and of decent work. Then there is also the awareness to make sure that the improvement of decent employment is carried out by respecting different factors. I mean, there is this topic of survival or profit that is considered as being the most important one, and this reduces the importance of decent work. So we have to strike a balance between two things. On the one hand, the awareness and the respect of legislation or existing regulations. So we have to make sure that there is a balance between those two. And of course, we have to create and support the dialogue. I think that the dialogue is really essential, and this goes through the awareness and also the capability to measure the impact or the progress. Now, as Christine said, it's only possible when you have reliable data. And so you have to make sure that people know how to use the data. If you want to make sure that countries can use reliable data to inform, you have to work with the decision makers, because themselves do not always understand the need to have data. So that's the first task. And that is what will make it possible to have an evidence-based system. Well, thank you so much, Evelien. Elena, do you want to react? to the points raised and to the participants. If you have questions, do not hesitate to write them in the chat or also to give your feedback. Evelien?
Yeah, thank you. Elena, maybe I'll make a few points and then I'll give the floor to you. Just looking back at my notes. So, yes, in terms of the data availability, it's Christine's question that we haven't checked in the sense that this was an application to South Africa. It's also using data that was freely available. The census, we have looked at different databases in South Africa, but the census was a good one in terms of giving us an overview of different dimensions of life of young people. Now, it's not that we use data that is kind of specific data collected in South Africa. There is no reason why it would not be available in other countries. So that is definitely an exercise worthwhile doing further. Now, on your question in terms of that projects as such are already very good in addressing social capital. I think on a project and a program level, that is definitely the case also in South Africa, but also Mahdi's program, for example. If you hear that, Mahdi, I liked the way you said, like, it's not really what we do with the young mother and the childcare, but we did address this need for her. I think that very nicely illustrates that many projects go further than their focus on education. I think if you look at a more policy-making level, that's often more difficult. And I think that's where the value of our work, of the paper lies, is that we try to address exactly that, the need for coordination on a much higher level between departments and ministries, so that there is less of silo working, which tends to be the default, because it's just very hard to organize it and set it up. So I think that's what we try to do in terms of with this paper, is exactly motivate and promote this idea of dialogue, as Albert also touched upon, and to try and show the different dimensions and indicators that are relevant for young people's low employability. And maybe it's also interesting to say that the way we chose the indicators is based on existing research that looks at the transitions of young people in education from school to work and transitions into work. So we've really tried to identify the most important drivers of those transitions and bring them together. The index is not built as in order to inform or rejig programs or their outcomes. It's also not our suggestion to do away with an indicator as employment to measure the effectiveness of a certain program. It really is used or meant to be used at the start of a project where you try to understand the population you're working with, the needs that they face, and that you as a program also consequently will have to address in order to really take your young people through a certain program. I'll stop there. Elena, maybe you have other things to add?
Yes, just a few extra points. It's maybe important to emphasize that, as Evelien already alluded to, that this index and the specific indicators that we included is really tailored to the context of South Africa. So there are a few indicators in there that I would guess would be important in many developing country contexts. But there are also a few indicators that might be very specific to the South African context and that are not necessary or not as important to include for other countries. So rather than proposing an aggregate global index that can be used in this form for any country in the world, we propose a way to have an index that is tailored to specific countries. And we think that that is a very interesting exercise to do, actually, especially for employability. But then we get to the other point of Christine, of course, of availability, both in terms of the availability of data today, the possibility of collecting that data, infrastructure-wise, money-wise, financing-wise. And there, of course, we are bound by the data that is available. And this will mean that in certain countries or contexts, maybe it's not possible to collect data on all the indicators that you would like to include, but you could take a more pragmatic approach and see what you have that is available, and if that can already provide a reliable, sufficiently reliable and sufficiently informative index. So there will always be a process of negotiation, I think, of what is possible, what is relevant and what is possible. That being said, I do know that in many countries, there are quite large data collection efforts ongoing. We have, for instance, the demographic and health surveys in many countries that already contain quite a lot of the data actually that we use in our index today. So I do think there are some possibilities to apply this to other contexts, definitely. In terms of programs, of course, indeed, it is a very costly effort, data collection and monitoring and evaluation. But as Evelien said, it's not designed to be a monitoring tool, and perhaps it could just be useful to inspire people designing the program to think about the multidimensionality and, you know, what kind of factors or drivers or aspects you would like to monitor in your program yourself in another, maybe more easy way. Then I think the final point that I would like to react on, your question about social protection is a very relevant remark, and we should think about that, about whether we should include it and what kind of circularity this might generate. And then finally, to touch a little bit also on the remark that Albert made about time, the time dimension. It's absolutely true that we are using a snapshot. So we are looking at one point in time to build the index, and that has several implications. We cannot say anything about how the dynamics are across time or how things might change because we just don't have the data. But it would be a very interesting exercise, and it is definitely possible to calculate the index over different years and to track how things change, and also in theory to adjust the index if certain indicators, for instance, no longer are relevant or become much less relevant. So that's a bit the advantage of the index, that it's very versatile and flexible, and you can keep on adjusting it to a particular context. But of course, this requires some resources, some effort to do this. Voilà, I'll leave it at that. I don't know if Evelien wants to add something, or if there are other questions from the audience.
Thank you. I wanted also, pardon, je souhaitais aussi passer la parole à Mahdi.
Well, thank you. I'd like to give the floor to Mahdi as well. Would you like to react after this exchange before we come to the end of this meeting?
Non, effectivement, sur cette, le fait de, je pense que tous les acteurs.
I think that all stakeholders would be interested in the possibility of measuring employability. It's the kind of indicator that's very important because it makes it possible in a way to define the framework of the interventions. And also it makes it possible to adjust the programs. So it would be interesting maybe to say to what extent this kind of index could be established for Morocco, taking into account the various programs that we have already in place. Programs developed by the private sector or the public authorities. There were many efforts focusing on the youth, and I think that this is the kind of indicator that makes it possible to adjust public policies as well as the intervention of organizations of civil society. Well, thank you so much, Mahdi. So today, through the various interventions, we started with an important conclusion, i.e. that 1 young people out of 5 is in the needs category, particularly the young girls and the young women. We've also heard that there are more and more young people accessing the labor market, and we have to find an answer for that. And it's also our responsibility as stakeholders to find answers in terms of training and education to ensure access to decent jobs. We have multi-dimensions, multi-sectors, and multiple stakeholders, decision makers, people responsible for training and education. It's also very important to work with partners, with the private sector, with the associations. I very much like the intervention saying that we have to complete the value chain. I think it's Alfred who mentioned this. And before we come to the end of this morning session, I would like to ask to each one of you in maybe 1 minute to make a summary, to give a message, a takeaway for the participants for the next meetings, because as I said, we have other sessions that will take place in November. So, Mahdi, 1 minute with your main message that you want people to take away when leaving this meeting. Well, coming back to the topic of my presentations, I would say that the designing of a program that happens at a certain level deserves to be very flexible, because sometimes you need to adjust things. And sometimes these adjustments can be very important and have an important impact on the final result of a program. So program and public policies to strengthen employability and the access to decent jobs must be flexible at local level or at regional level. Well, thank you. Evelien?
Yes, thank you. Yes, seeing we have been talking about employability, I think for us it remains very useful and necessary to think about what it actually means, employability, what is involved, what do we want to achieve when we include employability as a concept in our policy making documents and visions and missions. And I think our work tries to operationalize and kind of give a perspective on it, but obviously, as we've heard today, there is scope to keep exploring it further. But I hope at least that the intersectionality and multidimensionality of employability is a bit more clear for everyone today. Thank you.
Je vous remercie également. Elena?
Well, thank you so much. Elena?
I would like to build on that to first acknowledge that it is indeed very difficult to work in a more integrated way to achieve this type of coordination and collaboration that Albert also mentioned. And it is a challenge. It is for everyone. It is also for researchers. You have to step outside of your comfort zone, outside of your field of expertise, but it is really necessary and the way forward, I think, to make more lasting and more sustainable change.
Ok, je vous remercie, Elena. Je me tourne vers les deux keynotes qui sont présents à Bruxelles. Christine?
Now I'd like to invite the two keynote speakers to take the floor.
Thank you. I was struck by a comment that Albert made before, and which I'd like to unpack a little bit as my last statement, and which was that there is a perceived opposition between profitability and decent work. We have talked a lot about the normative dimension of why decent work is good and we should be doing it. But there is an economic argument of why decent work is good for business and for people. And it's very important that all of us do the plaidoyer, the advocacy on this. There is an economic argument. If you have good working conditions, your people will stay. If you have occupational safety and health, there will be less accidents, less cost. If people are protected when they fall sick, they don't fall into poverty, might leave the job, they will remain. And so it continues. Diversity is good for a business because you understand different perspectives. So these arguments are very key, and they are very key in discussing with employers of all sizes and with workers through social dialogue in your different countries to promote the concept of decent work as a normative, but also as an economically powerful tool that will help advance development. Thank you.
Je vous remercie, Christine, et je cède la parole à
Well,
Albert.
thank you, Christine. I'll give the floor to Albert. Well, thank you. I've written down a few points. The first one in this meeting that we focused on is decent work. As I said earlier on, in the African context, I consider this as the end of the road, as an ideal for each human being, and particularly for the youth and for the women, taking into account the African context. And this goes through various things, and I'm very happy that you've carried out this research because I think it's very interesting. And I'm convinced that the continuum between education, training, continuous training to reach employment, I think that it is a value chain that we have to continue defending without forgetting the multidimensional elements. And the productive and the private sector is very important in that respect. And for me, governments have to invest with incentive measures through the political public-private dialogue, because that is where you find the main stakeholders. So, and these stakeholders have to discuss this important challenge for society, that is decent work. And finally, our role as organizations, because I think that more than ever, we have to strengthen our advocacy work. Today, the consequences we observe through migration and insecurity, maybe it is linked to that work. Why does a young person want to leave his or her country if he or she has a decent work? So I think that's important for the development partners, and by doing that, we can support the work of the states.
Voilà, je vous remercie. Merci pour ces interventions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for these interventions. Thank you to all speakers, to all participants. I would like to apologize for how we had to organize this conference today. We actually had to improvise more hybrid than we thought. Thank you for your flexibility, speakers and participants, online participants. I also would like to say that in November, we'll have 4 Tuesdays between November the 7th and 28th, and you'll have a chance to analyze practical cases from different continents, projects shared by Educate. First of all, inclusion of people with disabilities and women, APF and Plan International. Another session dedicated to education and vocational training and how it fosters the creation of decent jobs. And we'll talk about the toolbox. A third session on educational approaches and how they foster the transition between school and the labor market. VVOB will organize that session. And the fourth session on work-based training. It will be organized by Enabel. Please do not hesitate to share your comments on social networks with the hashtag #EdForDecentWork. We recorded the session, and you will be able to download the PowerPoints on the website. If you didn't get an answer to your questions, we will be able to reply by email. You'll receive an evaluation form evaluation of this meeting, but please be kind to us, and sorry again for the format and the presentations, well, the way we had to organize them. So we hope you'll understand that, but do not hesitate to fill in this assessment form. I was supposed to finish inviting you to lunch, but this will not be possible. So thank you very much. Thank you very much once again. Thank you to all the speakers and online participants for your participation and for being present this morning, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you and bye-bye.